Today, we're going to discuss one of the most popular automotive brands in the world, a brand who is the undisputed king of the internal combustion engine, a company who at one point had a money-making cash cow, the highest revving sports car ever built, and a Formula One team whose incredible V12 engines propelled them into victory lane. What? No, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about Honda, the Ferrari of Japan. Today, Honda is known for building pretty much anything with some cylinders that cause internal combustion, from boats to corporate jets to lawnmowers sitting in my garage. And their cars are equally diverse, family-friendly sedans and SUVs, all the way up to Nürburgring-crushing hot hatches that take no prisoners. But this is a far cry from what their founder, Soichiro Honda, had in mind. He was a boy who grew up in the shadows of World War I, but his father fixed up bicycles, and he followed suit. Even with no formal education of any kind, his on-the-job training in Tokyo made him a great technician. Good enough to eventually become a self-employed auto mechanic. And let me tell you, he couldn't get enough of motorized transport, boats, planes, and of course, cars. He was involved in Japan's first ever motor race, and subsequently became Japan's first crash victim driving a custom Ford. He was thrown from his rolling car and injured his eye, so he never raced again. But that spark never left him. He ended up building piston rings for the Imperial Japanese War effort, which ended up with his factory being blown into a million pieces. So after the war, he sold his company's surviving assets to Toyota, and by 1948, he was in the business of selling motorbikes. While post-war Europe turned to microcars to get by during the rebuild, Japan turned to motorbikes, and the Honda A-Type was there to meet them. Many thought it was financial suicide to use expensive die-cast manufacturing so early in the rebuilding phase. I mean, the A-Type needed to be produced in huge volumes just to make the casting operation profitable. But profitable it was. The newly incorporated Honda Motor Company rose to the success with the A-Type, and by the time the D-Type came out, the other one, horsepower had tripled from 1 to 3. More importantly, it was the first motorcycle with a semi-automatic gearbox. It was so good, it was nicknamed the Dream Type. But even with all this, Honda needed a bit more. And turns out, all they needed was another war, and the Koreans happy to oblige in 1950. U.S. military contracts gave new life to the Honda Motor Company, giving them a cash injection and wartime production requirements necessary to make them profitable after the war. Honda's motorcycles became more and more advanced, and by the 1960s, they had simultaneously become the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world and won multiple MotoGP championships. But all this money hid a nasty secret that was starting to bubble up. While their two-wheeled game was, and still is, the best in Japan, their car program wasn't. Mainly because they didn't have one. And Toyota, Suzuki, and Mitsubishi were selling K-cars like crazy. So 2 years after Toyota, Honda set up their own automotive division made up of engineers from Toyo, a car manufacturer that went bust. Mr. Honda didn't want to rush and make a bad car, so he gave his motorcycle engineers and his failed automotive engineers all the time they needed to learn how to make a car. And I do mean a lot of time. The program was founded in 1957, but it wasn't until 1962 that Honda showed up at the Suzuka circuit to demonstrate their two first cars, a truck and a sports convertible. The pickup truck was called the T360 because it's a truck with a 360 engine. Not 360 cubic inches, mind you, 360 cubic centimeters. True to their motorcycle roots, the little four-cylinder revved to 8,500 RPM, making it one of the highest revving pickup trucks ever built to this day. And, interestingly enough, The engine was mounted underneath the passenger seat, which I would imagine makes it quite rattly, and makes it mid-engined. It made at best 30 horsepower, it had a top speed of 62 miles an hour, and it had a wheelbase of just 76.7 inches, shorter than the width of the rebooted Lamborghini Countach. Not the wheelbase, the track width could fit the entire wheelbase of a T360 in it. It is a tiny thing that probably reaches its towing capacity with a bag of marbles. But that's what Tokyo needed. The dense city streets were perfect for these K cars, and Honda was more than happy to build what Japan needed. And in turn, Japan was more than happy to buy them. From its launch in 1963 to its discontinuation in 1967, over 100,000 were sold. They even sold 10,000 of the higher output 500cc variants called the T500. It was a bit longer, was a bit more powerful, and could carry 882 pounds. Honda's first production car was a smash hit that put them on the map. It launched Honda's mini truck industry that later saw the TN360 sell nearly 1 million units in the following year. This was Honda's cash cow that gave them the cash flow needed to muck about with Mr. Honda's real fun: sports cars. While Honda was at work developing the T360, a new project came down from management directly from Soichiro himself. He wanted a sports car. So once the T360 started testing, all R&D shifted to the S360. That's right, the pickup truck and the sports car have the exact same engine. It's like they're a Ford F-150 or something. It's just that the S360 had a sleek two-door body that blew everyone away at Suzuka. There was just one problem to come out of this meeting. All of Honda's cars were red. Red and white was only allowed for government vehicles. But the design team was insistent on their car being red. So this meant that their design team leader had to make several trips to the Japanese Ministry of Transport to get government approval to use the colors. And after explaining to the minister that Honda was now building cars and not just motorcycles, the ministry approved the color choice, allowing all vehicles in Japan to be sold in red and white. Now they just needed a consumer-ready product for the Tokyo Motor Show, which was just 5 months away. Honda thought that the 30-horsepower engine might be a little slow even for a K car, so in that time frame, they swapped a larger displacement 500cc engine into the S360 by widening and lengthening the car, creating the S500. Yes, indeed, that is the same engine they would put in the T500 pickup truck. The Tokyo crowd went nuts at the Honda booth. The public was enamored with the T360 and the S360, but it was the S500 that drew the larger crowds. Combine that with a greater potential for export sales, the S360 was vetoed, and the S500 officially became Honda's second production car. And it was so good that it made Lamborghini's 350 GT, their first production car that launched at the same time, look like a lump of yesteryear. Sure, the 350 GT would annihilate the S500 in any measure, but in terms of technology and craftsmanship, Honda was legitimately one of the best in the world, even with a chain drive system. It had independent suspension on all four corners, a curb weight of just 1,600 pounds, and that engine. On paper, it's nothing at all. 45 horsepower, 0 to 60 time of 20 seconds, and a top speed of 90 miles an hour. But it got 45 horsepower from a tiny 530cc four-cylinder, meaning it had 85 horsepower per liter. The V12 Lamborghini, 80 horsepower per liter. The only car with a better figure in the world was the Ferrari 250 GTO at 100 horsepower per liter. This little four-banger had every buzzword in engine history added onto it. Aluminum components, hemispherical combustion chambers, dual overhead camshafts, and 4 carburetors, one for each cylinder. It doesn't even use engine oil, instead favoring a roller-bearing crank. All of that technology means high power and a very high redline, specifically the highest redline ever sold for 46 years. Screaming all the way to 9,500 RPM, it was only bested by the Ariel Atom V8 in 2009, and to date, only 7 cars have ever bested it. And let's be honest, they all have many zeros added into their price tag. Combine the lightweight with the brilliant suspension and the engine derived straight from an enthusiast's wet dream, you have the ultimate driver's car of the era, a bona fide MX-5 of the 1960s. You'll lose every single race, and you'll smile while doing it. Honda sold 1,400 of them in 11 months. Not bad for a post-war economy sports car. The S600 launched in 1965 and lost its title as the highest-running sports car on 4 wheels. The 606cc engine made 57 horsepower, but at a pathetic 8,500 RPM. Otherwise, it was a slightly faster S500, with one notable exception. It was the first Honda ever offered in left-hand drive, which meant Honda now had a presence in Europe for the first time, and it was also the launch pad for Honda's first 4-door, the short-lived L700 Estate. By 1964, Europe was chock full of lightweight, small roadsters, but the S600 was even lighter and even smaller than them, which meant even though it was way down on power, it could give the MGs and the Austins a run for their money, both in terms of outright pace and driver experience. The S600 was exponentially more successful than the 500, and over 8,000 of them were sold in 1965 alone, for a total of 13,000 in just 3 years. So for 1967, Honda went all out, with the biggest S model of them all, the 791 cubic centimeter big block S800. It was the biggest of all the variants, 131 inches long, 48 inches tall, 55 inches wide. Big as a relative term. And the engine was so big that the hood had a bulge in it just to fit the engine, which has to be the smallest engine's displacement ever to require a power bulge hood. But that big engine paid off. The S800 was Honda's first 100-mile-an-hour car thanks to its 70 horsepower engine with a 0 to 60 time of 13.5 seconds. It was nearly as fast as an MX-5 NA, but it came out nearly 3 decades earlier. It was a quick car, and it certainly felt like it. It also got disc brakes up front to replace the aluminum drums, and the chain drive system was replaced with a proper drive shaft. Although that did mean the S800 was straddled with a significantly less comfortable live axle rear suspension system, but hey, games of give and take, I guess. Interestingly enough, despite being the fastest and most powerful version, it was not as successful as the S600. It only sold 11,500 units in its production run. So it's solid, but not solid enough to justify a new model, and Honda wouldn't make another S-Series Roadster until the S2000, 33 years later. And while Honda was selling trucks like mad and higher revving engines than anyone else in the world, they were also scratching one last itch of Mr. Honda's: motorsport. Now, most manufacturers choose national touring cars or rallying for their first motorsport because the budgets are usually lower and the cars are usually simpler. But Honda was run by a man who, remember, entered the first ever Japanese motor race. So he went straight from 0 to 1,000 and entered Formula One in 1964. It was such a huge jump that the men put in charge of the project didn't even know what F1 was. But they did some research in 1962 to learn as much as they could about the garagistas of Cooper, Brabham, and Lotus. And like everything else, they had done it properly. The RA270 prototype, which became the RA271, was basically a Japanese Lotus, which is to say a bloody good first attempt. It had an aluminum monocoque chassis and inboard double wishbone suspension like the Lotus 25, but unlike Lotus, who were stuck with a Coventry Climax V8, Honda built their own 1.5-liter V12 from scratch, one of only 3 teams on the 1964 grid to do so. There were 2 problems though. One, a tubular rear subframe was added for better maintenance. This ballooned the weight well above the minimum requirement. And second, most of Honda's employees, again, had never even heard of F1 before starting this journey. And even worse, they clearly didn't study geography very well, since they decided to enter their first ever F1 Grand Prix at the 1964 German round at the Nürburgring. I can't think of a worse track to debut on for a new team than the Green Hell, and sure enough, they qualified 22nd out of 24th, but recovered to 9th before crashing with a few laps to go. So they tried again in Italy, qualifying 10th. Very good. But then retired with brake failure. And then Honda again retired at Watkins Glen to end their 1964 trial run 0 for 3. But to be honest, Honda wasn't too fussed about that, and used those failures to develop the RA272 for 1965. First, they cut the weight down with lightweight alloys to get closer to the minimum limits. Then they also significantly upgraded their engine. Their V12 quickly became the best engine in the entire 1.5-liter regulation era. It was more reliable than 1964 and was the most powerful and highest revving engine on the grid. It could make 240 horsepower at 12,000 RPM, and Honda could push it to 14,000 RPM if they needed to. It's one of the best sounding cars I've ever heard in my entire life. They lowered the engine and adjusted the bodywork for less drag and better cooling. Sure enough, after a disappointing Monaco Grand Prix, Richie Ginter finished 6th at Spa to take Honda's first ever Formula 1 point. 3 races later, they did it again at Zandvoort, and after some upgrades in Monza, the RA272 started showing real front-running pace. They managed to qualify 3rd in both Britain and America. And then it was time for the season finale at Mexico. The high altitudes worked wonders for Honda's fuel injection system. Ginther again qualified 3rd and simply stayed out of trouble. The Ferraris had crashes, and the high altitudes caused major problems for everyone except those running Honda's masterpiece of a V12, i.e. only Honda. Richie Ginther led every single lap of the race to take Honda's first ever Formula 1 Grand Prix victory, and to make it even better, his teammate finished 5th to mark Honda's first double top 5 finish. They scored 9 out of their 11 points in just this one round and jumped up to clutch 6th in the Constructors' Championship, just 3 points behind Cooper. Honda had done it. In just 3 years, they went from launching their first K car to winning their first Formula 1 Grand Prix. For Europe, it was a shocker to see a Japanese team beat them on reliability and pace, closing out the 1.5-liter regulation in style. But with the regulations gone, Honda had to go back to the drawing board for the new 3-liter era. So the RA273 only contested 3 rounds of the 1966 season for development purposes. Not only was the car overweight, over 700 kilograms, but it was very unruly in a straight line. 400 horsepower and no control whatsoever tends to do that. In fact, it was so fast and so heavy that it caused its own tire blowouts in Monza just 16 laps into the race. Once again, Honda's best results came in Mexico with a 4th place finish and their first ever fastest lap. By this point, F1 was so encompassing for Honda they completely abandoned their motorcycle racing and Formula 2 just to get their car right. Clearly, All of this dedication caught the eye of one man. In fact, the only man to ever win world championships on 2 and 4 wheels. 1964 F1 champion John Surtees. Honda tried once more with a modified RA273, but even with an incredible podium in South Africa, everyone knew the car was dead weight, and they switched to the RA300 for the rest of the season. The switch paid off, as Honda found themselves in a battle for the best of the rest between Cooper and Ferrari. That's right, the plucky little team was going toe-to-toe with the prancing horse themselves. Now, to be honest, neither of them competed for a whole season, so Cooper took third easily with consistency, but the battle for fourth was incredibly intense. Ferrari scored 3 third places in the first half of the season compared to Honda's 1. Even worse, Honda had 3 consecutive DNFs, meaning that Ferrari pulled a 10-point gap over Honda in the championship, and Honda themselves were stuck down in 9th, just 5 points to their name. But then Honda came back hard in the second half of the year. Surtees finished 4th at the Nürburgring, admittedly 1 place behind Chris Ammon's Ferrari. They were back at the front. But was it too late? 12 points is no mean gap to overcome, since a win was just 9 points. And Honda, let's be honest, at this point wasn't on track to win anything, and Ferrari could still very easily score more points in that time. Well, in theory. In practice, Ferrari didn't score a single point in Italy or America. As for Honda, their RA300 got co-designed by Lola, and then they got a bit lucky. Jim Clark and his Lotus 29 were completely in another league in Monza. He took pole position that was 1.8 seconds faster than John Surtees' best time in 9th. But then he got a puncture, and lost a whole lap fixing it. But Mr. Clark did not give up, and instead he charged through the field, unlapped himself, and took the lead with just 8 laps to go in one of the most impressive recovery drives ever seen. But his incredible pace simply used too much fuel, and he ran out on the final lap, coasting to 3rd after a heroic drive. Meanwhile, Surtees had also maneuvered his way up the ranks, using the brutal power of the Honda V12 to full effect. And when Clark had his second round of calamities, Surtees found himself in a battle for the lead, with Jack Brabham with less than a lap to go. And after an incredible duel, Surtees quite literally nosed Brabham on the line to win Honda's second Grand Prix by just 0.2 of a second. Just like 1965, this one result, this one win, jumped them up to 5th in the Constructors' Championship, and with neither Ferrari nor Honda scoring points in America, just 3 points separated them heading into the final round in Mexico. And Honda had it all to do. Ferrari driver Chris Amon stuck in 2nd on the grid in qualifying, with Surtees in 7th. Once again, Clark shined up front, winning the race despite having a broken clutch. But behind him, things were looking bleak for the Japanese team. Surtees was stuck in 5th, while Amon was cruising to an easy 2nd place. Honda needed a miracle to beat their Italian rivals, and on the last lap, they got it. Chris Amon's fuel tank ran dry, and as his engine gasped, he fell down to 9th, promoting Surtees to 4th and earning Honda 3 points. That meant Honda and Ferrari were tied at 20 points apiece for both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships. But since Surtees and Honda scored that win on Ferrari's home turf, they finished ahead of Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship by countback. Honda and John Surtees finished 4th overall in their championships, beating the titans of Ferrari at their own game. 1967 was Honda's F1 peak. 4 top 5 finishes, including a 3rd place and a win, while beating the prancing horse themselves. It would have been a beautiful end. But it wasn't the end. After the highs of 1967, Honda decided to compete in every race of the 1968 F1 season for the first time. The RA300 was an incredible F1 car, except for that one problem that Honda could just never really shake. It was habitually overweight. So in their hour of need, they came up with a new way to build the chassis: magnesium. Magnesium is incredibly light, even compared to the aluminum construction that they were using. And Honda prioritized this new magnesium car so much that the RA301 got its development cut immediately, after less than half a season. Now, to be honest, there were a few reasons besides the curb weight to prioritize the RA302. After the first 5 races in 1968, Honda had just one 8th place finish, with 4 consecutive retirements. They had 0 points and were stone dead last. And yet, John Surtees absolutely refused to drive the RA302 for the very same reason Honda wanted him to race in it. You see, he remembered the 1955 Le Mans disaster, where a magnesium-bodied Mercedes 300 SLR crashed and exploded in an unstoppable fireball. You see, once magnesium starts burning, there is no stopping it until there's no magnesium left. Surtees thought it was a death trap, and entered the French Grand Prix in his RA301, while his teammate Joe Schlesser used the RA302. And the problem with that is that the RA302 wasn't just made of unstable materials, it was just unstable. With a best time of 2:04.5 in qualifying, it was 6.3 seconds off of Surtees and over 8 seconds off of pole position. It was a terrible car. And even worse, it rained. The inevitable soon followed, and on lap 3, Schlesser went off the road and exploded. The magnesium burned at over 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit and melted the track around the wreckage. The temperature and the blinding light prevented rescue crews from putting the fire out for over 10 minutes. As you probably guessed, Joe Schlesser died in that accident. Something that Surtees didn't even find out about until he crossed the finish line in 2nd place. The RA301 was used for the rest of the season, with Surtees scoring Honda's last podium at Watkins Glen. 1968 was the turning point for the Honda Motor Company. Joe's death ended Honda's F1 career, while the success of the new N360 over the S800 pushed Honda away from sports cars to family-friendly economy cars that they're still focused on to this day. Mr. Honda formally stepped aside in 1973 to become an advisor until his death in 1991, but his influence cannot be understated. Honda is still the king of the 4-cylinder engine, something that dates back to the S500, while Honda's performance roots are shown with the Civic Type R, and the first mid-engine Japanese car, the NSX, and most obviously the S2000. His desire to compete in racing led to Honda's on and off obsession with Formula One. They returned as a constructor in 2006, scoring 4 podiums, including a win at the Hungarian Grand Prix with Jenson Button. But they were frequently involved with various teams as an engine manufacturer, partnerships that resulted in 9 drivers' titles, 8 constructors' titles, 315 podiums, and 140 of those being wins, making them the 5th most successful manufacturer of all time. It's true that Honda today is all about affordability and variety, but it's also true that their path was forged in the fires of performance and engineering mastery.